So I'm Krista Waldron. I teach at a very alternative school in Tulsa, Oklahoma. My students are mostly in the juvenile justice system, or they've come to us because they've been kicked out or dropped out of kind of everything else. We're like the last stop for dropping out for most. And sometimes they start over a few times. This is one of my classes, one of my English classes. So I was in Mary Lou's immigration unit, and we looked at immigration history and the stories that go along with them, and how they're influenced by policy, by gender, by so many factors. And this was generally a social studies unit, so I was very much outside my comfort zone for part of it, and I thank Mary for helping me through that. And I'm still struggling that. We start our units. We started on Friday, then on Monday. We really got things going. I had planned to start with some slave narrative and then go to Stephen Crane's Maggie, Girl of the Streets. And I know from my last units, which everything I've done here has been very influenced by research that I did at the beginning, teaching, dealing with trauma through writing, selecting texts for very at-risk kids who are way behind in reading. So Maggie, Girl of the Streets doesn't fit any of those criteria, except in terms of content. So I'm kind of all over the place. So my unit was looking at immigration history as kind of an interdisciplinary unit, looking at immigration narratives, and then with the final outcome of my students doing their own narratives, and the unifying element is the theme, the rites of passage. So I started to begin my unit, and I realized this is so wrong. I needed to engage my students first. So I started looking at the theme of rites of passage and the different stages. It turns out rites of passage is really very relevant to a lot of our students. There's all kinds of interesting research, and some of you may live in cities where you have communities doing things or recreating healthy versions of this, like the MAP program in DC. If Joseph Campbell said something like, our young men really need rites of passage to move them healthfully into adulthood, and if we don't give them, society doesn't give them good ones, they will make their own. So there's lots of research about this, and gang activity is kind of central to all of that research. And that's a very real issue at our school. Actually, we had an event this week that was kind of horrendous, involving that very thing, and something that was probably a ritual, though. I'm not even going to bring it up. Anyway, so we started looking at this ritual, at this rites of passage ritual, and talking about what do you guys do? What are your rites of passage? You know, what are the healthy ones? What are the unhealthy ones? And starting with some of the essential questions for my unit. And what they have here, they wrote on a piece of paper one of the rites of passage that they have gone through in their life. And you can't read these like I thought, but probation, getting on to the criminal activity and getting off of probation is one of the most common. Jail, a couple of baptisms. So one of the biggest challenges to all of us, and especially to my kids, is rigor. They are really focused on survival, not success. These are the kids that I'm with most of the day, but I'm also their English teacher. We've got attempted suicide, moving out, my first job, starting smoking because it was adult and it felt like a very important ritual and thing in itself. It's a very real and very hard lives. They have not been in consistent school for a long time, most of them. They are afraid of rigor. They don't want to have anything to do with it. It's way out of their comfort zone. So this is always my challenge. And then, you know, test scores, you know, we'll get there. First, we need to learn some very basic school again sometimes. And then the other one, the next one too, I've been showing them examples of novels that I taught from a long time. I guess it was the previous one. And how they're annotated. I had stuff all over the margins and colors, and I found a voodoo doll and a picture from a Toni Morrison novel that I'd drawn, and they thought that was kind of interesting. And I talked about how over time I created codes in college, and I know what I mean by LU or FU, which is follow up, not what you think. And so Lexi started creating her own code, and she got really into this. So I love this because this like shows so much effort and understanding, and we talked about, so if we read this together, and I ask you the next day what you read, you have absolutely no clue. So now we do this, and I see you again on Monday, what are you going to remember? And they were like, oh my gosh, wow, I totally get this. And the skill they can apply to other things, ACTs and whatever, when they get there. So this was exciting because it looks like rigor to me, more than we usually see in our classrooms. Some of my students don't know what Yale is, I've never heard of it. So, but they're getting it. We talk about this, and some of them are very excited. So I was thinking about, why is this unit, or the units I do here, different when I put so much care into other things? And I've done this a long time. I've taught 22 years, and I've taught at-risk kids a long time. I was thinking and preparing this, why is this so different? And I think that it's the excitement and motivation about being here on campus trickles down to them. They feel very important. They knew I was taking some pictures after the fact for use. And they were like, oh, this is so exciting. And they don't get excited about academic stuff, but it trickles down. And I think there's that. There's this, like, ooh, I'm doing something very important. I'm learning something very important because you learned it at someplace very important, and then we're worth doing that. But also it's the process, the research, the collaboration, the camaraderie, the love, everything that goes into this. And I maybe take a little more care into these units in the classroom, and they feel that. So a lot of what happens, I think, is very intangible when I look at what I'm doing here, what I've always done, and how that trickles down to my students, and how that affects the final outcome. They're hard kids, but they're the most fun kids too, because we've created a school where they feel very safe, and they'd almost rather be there than other places. So, but we don't often get here where they're really engaged with something really challenging and excited to go to the next place. Thank you.